Blondes, brunettes, redheads, girls in tank tops.
Every TV show starts with a plan. Writers map out the main characters, the big arcs, the emotional beats, and then, every so often, a character who was supposed to just pop in and out suddenly becomes the entire reason people are watching. The studio didn't see it coming, the writers didn't see it coming, and sometimes even the actors didn't see it coming. But the audience did. In this video, we're diving into those happy accidents. TV characters who were meant to be minor, side players, comic relief, or short-term obstacles, but who completely took over the show. We're talking about the leather jacket cool guys who stole scenes, the nerdy neighbors who became the franchise, and the temporary villains who walked on for a 3-episode arc and wound up carrying their own spin-offs. These characters didn't just show up. They changed storylines, shifted focus away from the original leads, and in some cases, rewrote TV history. From classic multicam sitcoms to 90s teen dramas and fantasy epics, they're the ones who snuck in through the side door and ended up sitting at the head of the table. So hit that like button, subscribe to Throwback Network, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our nostalgia-packed deep dives. Now, let's count down 10 TV characters who were meant to be minor, but took over the show. 10. Arthur Fonzie, Fonzarelli, Happy Days. When Happy Days first hit TV, the show was supposed to center on Richie Cunningham, the all-American teenager, and his wholesome family life in 1950s Milwaukee. Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli? He was just the cool greaser who hung out in the background. A side character meant to add a little edge and contrast to Richie's clean-cut world. He wasn't even supposed to be the focus of an episode, let alone the series. But then viewers met Henry Winkler's Fonzie. The leather jacket, the motorcycle, the thumbs up, the effortless he was instantly magnetic. Kids wanted to be him, adults secretly liked him, and suddenly this supposed side character had the kind of star power you just can't plan. The audience wasn't just enjoying Fonzie, they were tuning in for Fonzie. As ratings climbed, the writers and network executives did what TV always does when it spots a goldmine. They leaned in. Storylines shifted from Richie's school and family problems to Fonzie's adventures, friendships, and surprisingly, big heart. He moved from the fringes of Arnold's drive-in to living over the Cunningham's garage, literally and symbolically closer to the center of the show. By the later seasons, Happy Days had practically become the Fonzie show. He was the emotional anchor, the hero, the mentor, and the icon plastered across the marketing. It's one of the earliest and clearest examples of a side character walking on as a supporting player and riding off as the true star of the series. 9. Alex P. Keaton, Family Ties. Family Ties was born out of a simple idea. What happens when two former 1960s hippies grow up, have kids, and try to raise a family during the conservative Reagan era of the 1980s? The parents, Elise and Stephen Keaton, were meant to be the focus, a pair of idealists navigating yuppie America. The kids, they were supposed to support that core concept, not hijack it. Then came Michael J. Fox as Alex P. Keaton. In theory, Alex was just one of the children, a young Republican who clashed with his liberal parents. In practice, he was a revelation. Fox brought a perfect mix of fast-talking ambition, earnestness, and charisma that turned Alex from supporting son into the living embodiment of the decade. He wasn't just the conservative kid. He was the 80s, obsessed with money, success, and Richard Nixon. Audiences connected with him immediately. His arguments with his parents weren't just jokes. They mirrored real generational battles happening in households across America. Viewers didn't just want to see how the Keaton parents felt about the world. They wanted to see what Alex would say, scheme, and screw up next. As the show grew more popular, the balance quietly shifted. Storylines increasingly revolved around Alex's school life, internships, romances, and moral dilemmas. The parents were still important, but they were reacting to Alex rather than leading the charge. Michael J. Fox went on to become a massive star, but for a lot of fans, this is where they first saw what he could do. In a show designed to explore changing times through the parents' eyes, it was the son who walked in wearing a tie and carrying a briefcase and ended up running the place. 8. Steve Urkel, Family Matters. When Family Matters premiered, it was positioned as a blue-collar family sitcom spun off from Perfect Strangers, centering on the Winslow family. The show was supposed to be about Carl, Harriet, their kids, and the everyday ups and downs of life in Chicago. In the original setup, there was no glasses-wearing, suspenders-clad super nerd in sight. Steve Urkel was introduced later as a one-off character on a single episode, a weird, clumsy neighbor kid with a crush on Laura Winslow. He was meant to pop in, cause some chaos, and vanish. But Jaleel White's performance was so over the top, so specific, and so oddly endearing that the character hit like a lightning bolt. The voice, the walk, the laugh, the now legendary "Did I do that?" It all stuck in people's heads immediately. The audience response was undeniable. Urkel was suddenly all anyone wanted to talk about. The writers and producers brought him back, and then kept bringing him back, until guest nerd became series regular, and series regular became the entire gravitational center of the show. Over time, Family Matters shifted from a grounded family sitcom to a full-on Urkel showcase, complete with madcap inventions, alter egos like Stephen Urkel, and increasingly wild sci-fi plots. The Winslows were still there, but they were now playing straight man to Steve's antics. Merchandising followed, with dolls, cereal, and Urkel everywhere you looked. By the time the show wrapped, the idea that Family Matters had ever existed without Steve Urkel felt impossible. A character who was supposed to be a one-episode gag had become one of the most recognizable faces in 90s television. 7. Dylan McKay, Beverly Hills 90210. When Beverly Hills 90210 debuted, it was mostly about the Walsh twins, Brandon and Brenda, adjusting to life in ultra-wealthy Beverly Hills. The show's heart was supposed to be this middle-class outsider perspective. Enter Dylan McKay, played by Luke Perry, a brooding motorcycle-riding bad boy who was only intended to appear in a short arc. From the moment Dylan leaned against that locker with his movie star hair and wounded soul stare, the dynamic changed. Teen viewers, especially those watching Fox's growing slate of edgy shows, latched onto him instantly. He wasn't just a cool guy. He carried this sense of depth and damage that suggested bigger stories beneath the surface. The producers listened. Dylan became a regular, and the show started building its biggest storylines around him. His relationship with Brenda, his struggles with addiction, his fraught relationship with his father. These all became central, must-see TV moments that defined the early years of the series. The marketing followed suit. Posters, magazine covers, promos. Dylan was front and center. In a cast full of pretty faces, he became the tortured heartthrob, the one everyone either wanted to be with or be like. Even as new characters arrived and others left, Dylan's arc felt like the emotional spine of the teen soap. The irony is that the guest biker kid ended up carrying some of the show's heaviest dramatic weight. In a series built to showcase the Walsh siblings, it was Dylan McKay who roared in for a few episodes, and then parked himself in the middle of 90s pop culture. 6. Spike, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In the early seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the formula was simple. Buffy fights monsters while juggling high school and later college life, backed up by her friends and watched over by her mentor. The villains came and went, lasting a season if they were lucky. When Spike rolled into Sunnydale in Season 2, bleach blonde hair, leather coat, punk attitude, he was supposed to be just another big bad, a charismatic vampire to cause trouble and move the plot along. But something happened. James Marsters infused Spike with a mix of danger, sarcasm, and vulnerability that went way beyond evil British vampire. The audience loved him. Even when he was at his most murderous, Spike was fun to watch. He had presence. He had bite, literally and figuratively. Instead of getting staked and forgotten, Spike stuck around. The writers leaned into his popularity, slowly shifting him from villain to reluctant ally, then to chipped, neutered vampire hanging around the Scoobies, and eventually into a full-blown anti-hero and romantic interest. His complicated relationship with Buffy became one of the show's most talked about and dissected storylines. By the later seasons, Spike wasn't just a former villain hanging around the edges. He was one of the emotional core characters. His quest for a soul, his guilt, his attempts at redemption, all of that made the show's moral universe messier and more compelling. In a series built around the idea of a chosen one and her friends, Spike was never meant to be the beating heart of the fandom, but he walked into the story as a guest villain and ended up leaving as one of the pillars of the Buffyverse. 5. President Josiah, Jed Bartlet, The West Wing. When The West Wing was first conceived, the big idea wasn't let's do a show about the president. It was let's do a show about the people who work for him. The original pitch focused on the senior staffers, Josh, CJ, Sam, Leo, running around the halls, putting out fires, and dealing with the fallout of decisions made above their pay grade. The president himself was supposed to be a distant, mostly off-screen figure. Then, Martin Sheen walked in as President Josiah Jed Bartlet. Initially, he was only contracted for a handful of episodes. The plan was for him to appear in important moments, say a few wise or cutting lines, and then recede back into the background of the narrative. But Sheen's performance was impossible to treat as background. Bartlett was brilliant, righteous, stubborn, funny, and deeply human. He could quote the Bible and economics in the same breath, then turn around and deliver a dressing down that made entire scenes legendary. The audience wanted more of him, not just the consequences of his decisions, but the man himself. The writers adjusted. Suddenly, episodes revolved around Bartlett's speeches, his health, his past, his faith, his doubts. We saw him in the Oval Office, in the residence, in flashbacks. What was supposed to be an ensemble show about staffers supporting a mostly unseen leader became, in many ways, the story of a presidency, with Bartlett as the emotional center. By the time the series hit its stride, it was hard to believe Jed Bartlet was ever meant to be a side element. In the end, he's one of television's most iconic fictional presidents, a supporting character who walked onto set and quietly became the show. 4. J.J. Evans, Good Times. Good Times began as a spin-off of Maude, centered on Florida and James Evans raising their family in a Chicago housing project. The focus was meant to be on the struggles and resilience of the parents, two hardworking adults trying to hold their family together in tough economic circumstances. The kids were there to support that core story, not overshadow it. Then, Jimmy Walker's JJ walked on screen. Tall, lanky, loud, and impossibly energetic, JJ was the artistic, goofy oldest son, constantly cracking jokes and mugging for the camera. The character exploded almost instantly. His dynamite catchphrase became a cultural phenomenon, echoing in playgrounds, school halls, and talk shows across the country. Audiences couldn't get enough. Every time JJ opened his mouth, something quotable seemed to come out. The network and writers took notice, and, as often happens in TV, they began rewriting the show around what was working in the ratings. JJ's antics moved from seasoning to the main dish, but that shift wasn't without controversy. Esther Rolla, Florida, and John Amos, James, reportedly felt that the show was drifting away from its original mission of portraying a realistic black family dealing with real-life issues and turning into a cartoon built around JJ's comedy. Still, from the audience's perspective, JJ had become the face of Good Times. Whether you think that helped or hurt the show's legacy, There's no denying what happened. A character meant to support the parent's story ended up dominating the conversation. When people remember good times today, they often remember the laughter first, and JJ was at the center of most of it. 3. Cosmo Kramer, Seinfeld. In the earliest conception of Seinfeld, the show's focus was pretty simple. Jerry, his stand-up, and his everyday life in New York, surrounded by friends who were just as neurotic as he was. Kramer, the neighbor across the hall, started off as a kind of urban myth. A strange guy who borrowed Jerry's stuff, barged in uninvited, and then vanished back into his own odd private universe. He was designed to be an oddball accent, not the core of the show. But Michael Richards took that basic blueprint and turned it into one of the most unforgettable TV creations of all time. The hair, the vintage clothes, the wild physical entrances into Jerry's apartment, Kramer didn't just walk into scenes, he exploded into them. As the series went on, the writers realized they could basically give Kramer any bizarre scheme and Richards would make it sing. A coffee table book about coffee tables? Sure. A make-your-own pizza place? Why not? Levels in his apartment instead of furniture? Of course. Kramer became the pure ID of Seinfeld, the part of the show where reality bent just enough to let the truly weird in. Audiences loved him. His episodes and subplots were often the ones people quoted and remembered most. The character's energy was so unique that the show began to rely on him as its chaos engine. If an episode needed to go off the rails in a memorable way, you could almost guarantee Kramer was involved. By the end of the run, Kramer wasn't just Jerry's neighbor. He was one of the defining faces of 90s television, a side character whose wild entrances and half-baked schemes helped make Seinfeld the phenomenon it became. 2. Dr. Frasier Crane, Cheers, Frasier. When Dr. Frasier Crane first walked into Cheers, he was not supposed to be a long-term resident of the bar. He was introduced in Season 3 as Diane Chambers' rebound boyfriend, a slightly stuffy psychiatrist meant to complicate her on-again, off-again relationship with Sam Malone. In other words, he was a plot device with a fancy degree. But Kelsey Grammer's performance turned that plot device into something much bigger. Frasier was pompous, yet vulnerable, articulate, yet deeply insecure. He didn't just clash with Sam. He clashed with everyone, and in hilarious ways. That contrast, pretentious shrink surrounded by Boston barflies, was comedy gold. The writers saw it, and gradually Frasier shifted from Diane's boyfriend to one of the bar's core regulars. He had his own relationships, his own stories, and his own emotional arcs. It's easy to forget now that for years, he was simply part of the Cheers ensemble, sipping beer and offering unsolicited analysis to anyone who would listen. Then came the real twist. When Cheers ended, Frasier didn't fade away. He got his own show. Frasier moved the character to Seattle, introduced his ex-wife, his brother Niles, his father Martin, and radio producer Roz. And somehow, the supposed supporting character from Cheers became the center of one of the most acclaimed sitcoms in TV history. 11 seasons, a stack of Emmy Awards, and a full cultural identity later. It's wild to remember that Frasier Crane's original purpose was just to irritate Sam and complicate Diane's love life for a little while. Instead, he walked out of that Boston bar and straight into television royalty. 1. Xena, Hercules, The Legendary Journeys. If you want the ultimate example of a character who was never meant to take over, but absolutely did, you end up with Xena. She didn't even start on her own show. Xena was introduced on Hercules, The Legendary Journeys as a villain, a ruthless warrior princess whose job was to fight Hercules, cause trouble for a few episodes, and then exit, possibly in a very permanent way. But then Lucy Lawless stepped into the armor. Xena wasn't just evil. She was compelling. There was a complexity behind the eyes, a sense of conflict and potential redemption that went way beyond Monster of the Week. Viewers noticed immediately. Letters poured in, buzz started building, and suddenly the plan to kill off Xena didn't seem like such a great idea. Instead of dying, Xena got a second chance, both in story and in the real world. She was redeemed, shifted from villain to anti-hero, and then spun off into Xena, warrior princess, in 1995. What was supposed to be a temporary adversary became a full-time hero headlining her own series. And that series didn't just exist in Hercules' shadow. Xena exploded into a 90s syndication juggernaut, building a passionate fan base, exploring surprisingly ambitious themes, and turning Lucy Lawless into an icon. For many viewers, Hercules became the show Xena started on, not the other way around. It's the purest form of this list's theme. A character designed for a short arc on someone else's show grows so popular that she steals the spotlight, the audience, and ultimately the franchise. Xena walked in as a guest villain and rode out as a legend. Conclusion: when the audience rewrites the script. Looking back at these characters, there's a pattern that jumps out. No matter how carefully TV creators plan, the audience always gets a vote. Fonzie was supposed to hang out at the edge of Happy Days. Alex P. Keaton was just one kid in a family on Family Ties. Urkel was a one-off joke, Dylan a short-term bad boy, Spike a disposable villain, and Bartlett a mostly off-screen president. JJ, Kramer, Frasier, and Xena were all meant to be supporting pieces in someone else's story, but something about them connected. An unexpected spark in the performance, a perfectly delivered line, a chemistry no one could have predicted. Viewers didn't just like these characters, they latched onto them. That kind of response is impossible to ignore, and slowly but surely, entire shows bent around that gravitational pull. Sometimes that shift caused friction behind the scenes. Sometimes it pushed original leads out of the spotlight. And sometimes it gave us incredible spin-offs and iconic TV moments we never would have gotten if the writers had stuck to the original plan. So the next time you're watching a show and there's a side character who keeps stealing every scene, remember, you might be witnessing the birth of the real star. Let us know in the comments which minor characters you think deserved to take over their shows, or ones that actually did. And if you enjoyed this trip through TV's accidental icons, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here on Throwback Network for more deep dives into the shows that made growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s unforgettable.